welcome to Comically Incompetent. My name is Doug.
And I'm Ben.
And this week, just want to remind everyone, we're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, at Comically Incompetent Podcast, or if you want to find us on Twitter or Instagram, at Comically Pod. So, just to get right into it, this week we are drinking a beer called Crazy Hazy Double IPA. But the real important thing here, what ties into our character, is the brewery called Boomtown Brewery. That's right. This week we're talking about Firestorm. We'll get into why that makes sense. And Ben, why don't you start talking about Firestorm so we can get there?
All right. So this week's episode of Firestorm. Firestorm, DC character, came out in 1978, originally penned by Gary Conway and Al Milgrom. Pretty interesting fellow. I think I say that about everyone, but I'm very interested in the subject matter, as you might imagine, based on the fact that we have a podcast about this. Few notes going into it. So Firestorm is one of those things like saying a Green Lantern or one of those things. It's kind of like a concept. So I'm going to narrow down exactly what we're talking about here. Primarily, I'm going to be talking about the Firestorm that's composed of Ronnie Raymond and Martin Stein. Firestorm's a fusion of two characters generally. Those are the characters that took up kind of the most time in DC literature and things like that. Additional notes that I want to make, that the original Firestorm was a character named Jason Rush. So I wanted to give Jason Rush a shout out. He was the one that was actually created in 78. So the concept of Firestorm is when that started. And then we're going to talk a little bit about like the Arrowverse stuff. And in Arrowverse, we see Ronnie Raymond as Firestorm. But for the majority of it, it's Jefferson Jackson, which is a more modern iteration of Firestorm. So leading into what this character looks like, I'm going to describe a couple different characters, because like I said, it's a fusion. So Ronnie, which is the one we're primarily going to focus on, is generally depicted as a young, generally pretty athletically built white guy. Like he's usually like, 6'1", 6'2", like 200, 210 pounds. Like he's an athletic guy. Martin Stein, who much more often is almost always part of Firestorm. Yeah, Martin Stein is generally depicted as kind of an older white professor or researcher. He's usually depicted kind of like the guide that you might see in an Indiana Jones movie. Just like that English researcher fellow. And then the third one that I'm going to describe is Firestorm himself/itself, because it's kind of this concept, job, position thing. It's a lot to kind of get into, but it's generally clad in yellow and red, kind of almost like a rubbery looking suit. Looks very flame retardant, as it kind of better have. And then his hands and head are on fire. I love how you just brisk over that in a comic book podcast. Like, his head's on fire.
I mean, that's pretty standard for a lot of like the fire people in
it's like it happens.
Books.
Like Ghost Rider.
Yeah.
there's the weekly reference to Ghost Rider.
You always bring it back to Ghost Rider.
So then another thing I want to point out about the way that the character looks as far as the flames. In the earliest iterations, generally it was like normal looking fire. Like it was just flame, flame, flame. However, in the more recent iterations of them and in the television iterations, it's almost more of like a plasma. Like if people imagine like what Captain Marvel looks like when it's more of a glow, like a plasma, it looks like a soft kind of flame. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of the more recent iteration of them. And then, as we mentioned, in the most recent iterations, we've started to see this Jefferson Jackson iteration of Firestorm, who is another kind of about the same kind of idea, like athletically built, late teens, early 20s African American fellow. That's the many different iterations of Firestorm. What we're going to focus on as far as his like original story and everything is the traditional Ronnie Raymond and Martin Stein story, just because, again, it's got the most hours behind it.
Yeah, but we will go into the Martin Stein and Jefferson Jackson version, because that is the most that we see in television. So we'll get into that part later.
We're going to try and do our best job covering all of them, giving all of them their time. Luckily, unlike the Green Lanterns, there aren't 7,000 of them, so we can give everybody their time in the sun. So how did this whole situation start out? How'd this go down? So in the traditional comic book iteration, Ronnie Raymond is a high school student who's very focused on man-made disasters like Chernobyl, Three Mile Island, Hiroshima. These are all like nuclear accidents. In his late teens, he joins an activist group trying to stop the creation of a nuclear power plant for fear of a Chernobyl-esque situation on American soil. He learns that the group that he joined, which he originally thought was like, pacifist and protest and, let's do our best to try and stop it, is actually like a pretty extreme group. So what they planned to do is they were actually going to break into the power plant and sabotage it to misfire and destroy the reactor, which, one, obviously is horribly illegal and horribly dangerous, but this is the whole thing he got in there to stop. Like, this is exactly how you could have some sort of horrendous issue, which this is a very similar thing to like what we see in the Arrowverse version with the Star Labs explosion. So they did keep it kind of true on that, where it's from this I believe that one's like a particle accelerator or something. In the traditional story, it's a like a nuclear power plant.
Yeah, in the show, it's the Firestorm Matrix.
Oh god, it's so cool. Yeah, oh man, there's a whole thing about the Firestorm Matrix. It's so cool. Oh my gosh, it's really cool. So he tries to stop this, essentially, this sabotaging of the factory, because he realizes that, or of the plant, because he realizes, obviously, terrible idea. They go in. The leader of this activist group actually finds the plant manager, who's Martin Stein, who we've gotten through our descriptor of, and he attacks Martin Stein, knocks him unconscious. The sabotage doesn't fully succeed, but it does cause the reactor to have a misfire, which blasts both Ronnie and Martin with this crazy amount of nuclear force and instantly fuses them into what we now know as Firestorm. So, like I've alluded to earlier on, I was like, Firestorm is a combination of people. It's this nuclear reaction, or the Firestorm Matrix, explode essentially and fuse these two people together. From then on, that was kind of the start of Firestorm. There's always a learning curve, which like I think the television shows did a very good job of getting into, because like they didn't choose this. It's a weird experience. They just got randomly literally thrown into each other. They are able to separate from each other, so that's kind of an important point to go into. Essentially, from there, they went on to live their normal lives. They are still Firestorm, but they live their normal lives. He works at the nuclear plant. Ronnie's a high school student, very intelligent high school student. He graduates and basically applies to a bunch of different universities, and he ends up choosing a university in Pittsburgh, which is the same location that Stein was actually hired at to be a professor. So there's an interesting bond between these characters. It's almost... I'm sure there's like a sciencey, like there's this chemical bond between them, or this fusion. I mean, like obviously fusion bond. I kind of like to call it like a soul bond between the two characters that make Firestorm. Again, it's something I think the television show did incredibly well. I'm a really big fan of that iteration of Firestorm, by the way. So if anybody's like, wow, Ben's sure talking about the television show more than he normally does, I really, really, really like Firestorm in the television show. That's actually how I got into it. And then I went back and read a bunch of the comics, and I was like, oh my god.
The two halves thing, like having to work together, reminds me a lot of in Pacific Rim. They have to have that, like, they have to do the drift and like make sure that their minds work together. There's like this chemical thing that their minds can work together to create one mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very much so like that, and they can't really be separated from each other. They start to get weak and they feel sick, and so that's why. Specifically, that's kind of why I wanted to highlight this exact example of like him going to become a student at Pittsburgh, where Stein is a professor at Pittsburgh, because they can't get separated yet. Yeah. It's kind of hard to base your life off of somebody else's life when you're so different. It's a high school and college student versus like a researcher and professor. What are you going to do? So from that point on, they basically kept honing their powers. They've actually been a part of a ton of different things. They've been a part of the Justice League. They've been a part of what's called like the greater Firestorm Matrix. So the Firestorm Matrix is like a concept, kind of like the Green Lantern Corps, or being like a Ghost Rider. You maybe not realize this until you get way too into comic books, but a lot of characters are kind of part of this idea, this greater idea, which I think is originally designed because I think it gives the comic book writers a lot of creative outlet, where if they want to explore new stories, they have this basis that they can have as many stories as they want out of. If they're like, if we're talking about like Green Lantern, and they're like, well, we want to see a Green Lantern do this, but Hal Jordan wouldn't do that. It's out of his character. Same kind of thing. Like, as in this episode, we're going to be talking a lot about the difference between like Ronnie and Jefferson Jackson. Like, it's the way you can have the same character, but they can act very differently. Like, they're both good guys, but they handle situations incredibly differently. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I feel like when there's only one version of a character, I feel like a lot of writers would be afraid to give that character an arc, because an arc eventually leads to an end of a character. And when you have a character who needs to run for however many issues, you can't really give them an arc to end them. So I feel like that having multiple versions gives I think, better characters in a way, because it gives them good story arcs. It gives them good ways like that they can grow and change and then eventually end.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good way.
One.
That's a really good way to look at it. It allows character development while still having the superheroes that we know and love.
Exactly.
And I think Firestorm is a great example of that. Okay, so I'm going to assume this is going to be a little bit tougher of a one. So we're going to go into powers. I'm going to explain basically the core concept of Firestorm, and then I'm going to let you get some guesses as to what that means.
Okay.
It'll all make sense in a second. Okay, so we keep bringing up this Firestorm matrix. The way that I describe the Firestorm matrix is essentially it's the power over high school chemistry. And I know that's going to sound really confusing. So if we think about the things that we learned in like high school chemistry and physics, we think a lot about like energy and waves and rays and all these sorts of things. So he's not just like a piece of fire,
Yeah.
He basically controls different elements, and he controls properties of elements and states of matter, and he does like lots of weird things like this. So it might be a little bit of a tougher one, but let's take some shots now that I've kind of laid the groundwork for like, it's kind of like powers of chemistry and physics. What kind of stuff do you think this guy can do? You've seen him in the shows, so there's some stuff you're probably very aware that he's done.
I mean, create fire.
He can create fire, which is the quintessential cool guy power.
Yeah, of course. I don't know. I'm drawing a blank. I got nervous.
Yeah, I don't blame. No, this one's really hard. Okay, so I'll kind of go into some of them. I'm gonna skip the easy. He's strong. He's fast. Yada yada yada. He's durable. Yada yada yada. So going back to kind of what I described as like that power over high school chemistry. So one of the first cool powers that he has, it's not necessarily his most important one, but it's neat, is he can actually change the density of matter. So, as you know, if you know or don't know, density is how compacted something basically is. They talk about things like uranium or whatever, like super dense, so it's super heavy for like the size of it, because the atoms are really close together. So, he could make, the atoms in a rock super spread out, so the rock's as light as air. He could, make water as dense as a rock. It's, all sorts of cool stuff like that. Second thing is this one is mostly what you see in the movie iteration, or in the television iteration, sorry. He can absorb energy and he can release energy, which is kind of what his power seems to be in those shows. Because I think that makes the most sense. Like, if you have this character that's messing with the density of stuff, I don't think it's super fun in television, because you're like, oh, look, you magically made it float, or you magically made it fall. Like, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
He can, this is, I think, his strongest power. You might say the density is again, but that's not fun. I think his strongest power, and as to why I thought this was a great one to go with that Boomtown, is he can create nuclear blasts by absorbing energy. He's kind of a give and take. So, he's that, you might see him like thrown into a generator's about to blow up, and he can like pull all that energy into himself, fly out into the middle of the ocean, and just release that energy. Obviously it's going to be too much for him to control, but he can literally contain and release nuclear explosions, which is about as powerful as you can get.
Yeah.
Feasibly, right? I mean, like, without going too crazy, if we're just looking at it at a human level, what's more powerful than, like, a nuclear explosion? That's kind of it, right?
Yeah, that's insane.
So that's pretty cool. Along to go with some more of those, like, I was talking about, different forms of matter and stuff. He has both X-ray and thermal vision, so he can see through things. He can see heat signatures, things like that. He can fly due to a combination of like reducing his own density, as well as like the propulsion from the flame and plasma. He heals himself. Doug, he heals himself in the coolest way I've ever seen. So we talk about a lot of characters that can heal themselves through like, oh, it's because they don't actually get hurt, or like Wolverine is just rapid healing. Yeah. What he does is he literally changes the molecules of stuff around him to like graft into skin.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm like, whoa. I'm like, that's like the most creative way I've ever heard a comic book writer describe how somebody heals themselves. It's like, it's not magic. It's science. I mean, obviously, you can't really do that. But I think it's so cool when comic book creators are like, you know what? We're going to dig into the weeds a little bit. We're going to get a little scientific with this character. And yeah, I mean, obviously there's things that people are going to get hung up here and there. But it's cool that it's not just, I mean, like, I love Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange was cool, but I think it's very easy to write from a perspective of creating magic. But when you really have to dig into it and be like, scientifically, how does this character function? I think those are really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, the writer of this character had to go to the library and do some serious research.
Seriously. And then the last thing that I would count as power, which we've talked about a little bit, but I think should be like reiterated, is, I mean, he can fuse into Firestorm. That's pretty cool. And they can kind of do that on command. They can, again, I think the TV show did a great job kind of explaining this. They join up, they leave, they join up, they leave. Oh, and I realized that was the last one, but the truly last one, because this is more of like a note than a superpower, is that the two people have kind of like a link between them. We talked about that like soul bond earlier. But for instance, they can tell when the other's in danger. They can tell when the other's overly stressed. They can tell, if the other one is going to die. Because, I mean, as we've seen, there's been several Firestorms. Primarily, there's been several of, like, the host. Like Ronnie is the host, for instance. So when he turns into Firestorm, he still kind of looks like Ronnie. And Martin is essentially like a brain functioning in there. Like, he's, like, takes over part of his brain. And they work together in this matter. So, I mean, that's kind of a footnote. Like, it doesn't, you don't fight crime with the fact that you can tell your friend's about to die. Like,
yeah,
it's kind of weird, but, Yeah, so that's kind of the last little point onto, like, what powers does this guy have? Again, I love it. I love that they've given it the scientific background. He's been around for, like, a fair deal of time. He's done a fair deal of stuff. Generally, I will say he's usually mostly earthbound, but he does go to the cosmic level, which I always like to bring out additional stuff. He actually, during one of the runs, was a member of the Black and White Lantern Corps, which are, gosh, what's the way to describe this? It's kind of like if the lanterns, but instead of being in color, being in control of the color green or the color yellow, they're in charge of the dead and those fighting the dead. I didn't want to get too far into that, but it actually ends up being, it was a fairly substantial comic book run. So I wanted to give it a nod.
I want to do an episode on that. That sounds really cool.
It's pretty sweet. It's really, really cool. It's the Black Lantern Corps is made up of all these like dead villains and heroes that are being corrupted, and the White Lantern Corps is like created to battle them. It's super cool. But again, there's no way we can fit that into this episode. But no, that's actually a good point. I like that you like that, and we'll work on something to get an episode going about the additional Lantern Corps.
Cool.
Yeah, so I mean, in general, that's kind of what this character's done. We've seen him iterated actually a couple times in the television shows, which I bet you'll go into, because we actually see Ronnie and Jackson, which is really cool. Jackson's awesome in that. So as far as comic books, I think that's more or less where we're at. I'm curious to kind of hear your take, because I know you've seen some of the Arrowverse stuff.
All right. So as far as television and film and live action, the first iteration, I believe, that we see Firestorm is that the original Firestorm of Ronnie and Martin Stein appeared all the way in the 1980s. So 1984 on ABC's Super Friends, the legendary superpower show. He's in there, and that ran from 1984 to 1985. And then also the Superpowers team, Galactic Guardians, he appears in there. Both those were created by Hanna-Barbera, which, if anyone knows, it's Hanna-Barbera was like the original, like the Flintstones and the original Scooby-Doo and like kind of stuff
I thought
like that.
that name sounded familiar. I loved the Flintstones.
Yeah, yeah. So Hanna-Barbera did that in the 1980s, and then we have Firestorm was just like on a bunch of different things. They're in Cartoon Network's Justice League Unlimited, a bunch of different stuff. But I think the more famous one that we have is live action in the Arrowverse. So the show starts out with Professor Stein, who's portrayed by Victor Garber, who's a pretty famous actor.
He does a great job too.
Yeah.
He's like, that's like a top show. Like when I imagine Martin Stein, it's that guy.
Yeah. No, I mean he's a great actor. I mean we've seen him in stuff like Argo, which is fantastic, Titanic, just a bunch of different things. And then Ronnie Raymond, who is portrayed by Robbie Amell, who I believe is the brother of the guy who plays the Arrow, isn't it? Stephen Amell?
I think it's pronounced Amell.
Amell, yeah. I mean, they look like they could be brothers.
Yeah, they certainly look like they're brothers.
Yeah. So we have those two playing Firestorm in the original, like in the beginning, in the Flash. So Flash was 2014. It started out. So they do their whole thing, and then at some point in the show, I don't remember exactly when, we have Jefferson Jackson, who's portrayed by Franz Drame. I don't know how to say his name.
That's a cool name,
I should have looked it up. He's
Franz.
a Brit. Yeah, I didn't notice he's British. Oh yeah, wait, it's the dude from Attack the Block. Never mind, I did know him. He's a really good actor. He portrays Firestorm along with the same actor, Victor Garber, still playing Martin Stein. So in the show, Ronnie, who's our original Firestorm, is an engineer at Star Labs, and Caitlin, who is, what's her character's name? Killer Frost. Killer Frost's fiance in the show, but I don't think she's Killer Frost at the time.
Well, that becomes this whole thing, because I believe in that universe, Killer Frost, because they get into the whole like multiverse thing. I believe she's Killer Frost in one of the other like multiverses. I think in the primary one, she maintains being Caitlin.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, they get into the weeds with that. So I mean, like,
yeah.
But that is the character that ends up being Killer Frost. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the show, Professor Stein is the creator of the Firestorm Matrix.
That's like it's still so cool. It's just such a cool.
It's a really cool
Firestorm Matrix. Oh my god.
Yeah. In the show, Ronnie is presumed deceased from the particle accelerator explosion while saving his coworkers' lives. Turns out he didn't die. He became Firestorm. And
flame on.
Wrong fire guy. Wrong fire guy. And then at some point, a former high school football star, Jax, gets injured by the particle accelerator explosion, ending his collegiate career before starting. Then eventually, yada yada yada, Jax becomes Firestorm as well, replacing Ronnie. Ronnie. See, it's confused because Ronnie is played by Robbie.
That explains why I was having a hard time with that name earlier. I don't know why I kept messing it up when I was like writing up my notes. I'm like, am I stupid? What's wrong with me? No, it's Robbie and Ronnie. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So then Jefferson Jackson replaces Ronnie Raymond as Firestorm. Before we go back into that, because I know we have a lot to say about the live action versions, there are 2 film versions. Both of them are animated. He is played by Jason Rush. He's the Jason Rush version of Firestorm. Sorry, voiced by Cedric
Jason Rush
Yarbrough.
is the original Firestorm.
Yeah.
So if we were to look timeline, it went Jason Rush, Ronnie Raymond, and then Jefferson Jackson. Which 0.5 second aside, Jefferson Jackson is the coolest and most American name of all time.
So the Jason Rush version appears in Justice League Crisis on Two Earths, voiced by Cedric Yarbrough. And then the Jason Rush version also appears in Lego DC comic book superheroes The Flash, voiced by Phil Lamar. And then a quick side note, just because I feel like I have to, just to say it, Ronnie Raymond and Martin Stein version of Firestorm is also a playable character in Lego Batman 3, voiced by my favorite voice actor, Nolan North. I just had to plug that because I love Nolan North
I love
so
Nolan.
much.
Dude, Nolan North, guy's a treasure. Guy's an absolute treasure.
Yeah, not that he needs it or wants it or knows we exist, but Retro Replay on YouTube is fantastic, and that's his YouTube channel.
We're going to throw a bone to the little guy. I think you guys should check out this Nolan North guy. I think he's going places.
He is fantastic. Easily one of my favorites, up there with, obviously, the other very famous, also part of Retro Replay, Troy Baker.
Troy Baker's got gray hair. I normally don't care about hair, but he's got gray hair. Great.
Well, you're usually bald, so...
Yeah, that's
not bald. You shaved your head.
Shaved head. I'm not bald. I hope I go bald.
It would make your life a lot easier.
So much easier.
But yeah, I know I didn't watch too much of the television shows in the Arrowverse. I know you watched a lot more than me. I did see Jefferson Jackson take the place of Ronnie Raymond as Firestorm. I thought he was fantastic. I mean, that actor, Franz, I gotta say his name right, man. I don't know why I can't say their names. It's a tough name. Unless it's spelled out for me, I'm not gonna get it right.
I think it's better to admit that we don't always have the correct pronunciation of somebody's name than to butcher it. So yeah. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I thought he did a great job. So for anyone that hasn't seen a ton of the Arrowverse stuff, he is I'd call it like a minor character in The Flash, and then in DC Legends of Tomorrow, which is definitely the worst of all the Arrowverse shows, but it's also definitely my favorite of all of them. He's actually one of the main characters of that show. Like he's one of the showrunners, I guess is the term for it, like a main.
No,
what showrunner?
He's main cat. A showrunner is the person who is like they're a behind the camera person. They're part of like the crew.
That's like incredible. I thought it was just like a main character.
No, that's like a person who like basically runs the show.
Runs the show? Yeah, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah,
like
they're in charge of directors and the writing, and like they're in charge of everything when a show's being produced.
Dude, I learned something today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's not a showrunner. And he's one of the main characters in DC Legends of Tomorrow, and that's where you really see his character evolved. Because essentially, the whole like Ronnie transitioning from being the Firestorm to Jackson being the Firestorm, I believe that's all done in the Flash. I think by the time we get to DC Legends of Tomorrow, it's just Jackson. But I haven't seen the first season of that show in a little bit.
No, that is right. I believe that Ronnie makes another appearance at some point, but I believe it's, as far as Firestorm goes, it is Jackson the whole time.
Yeah, that show is great for anyone that's curious. It's super, it does not have the greatest ratings, and it does not have the greatest reviews. Well, because it's a show about time travel, and I think there's only ever been one show about time travel that people thought was good, and that was like Doctor Who. I don't think any other shows ever had good reviews being about time travel.
I love Doctor Who.
Yeah, that show's really good. That's one of those that I need to log more time into. I thought that show did a great job, though, kind of conveying this bond between the characters, especially that we literally see a transition from one host to the other for Firestorm. Like, that's monumental. I don't know if they necessarily showed it. I guess they showed it as monumental, but like as far as in the DC universe, like that's a giant pivotal point when there's a new Firestorm, because the host is effectively who gets the say at the end of the day. Like Martin is in there consistently guiding whoever the body of Firestorm is. But as far as like moving the legs and arms at the end of the day, a new host is a whole new character, a whole new Firestorm. So it was handled very, very well. I'm amazed, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Because that's not easy to do. Not easy to do at all. But the Flash is awesome. So, you know, if any writers and directors are going to do it, it's the crew working on that show. Can't say enough good things about them.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the Flash for a few seasons, and I remember this taking place. I remember liking the character. I think he also looks really cool. They did a very good job of making him, I think, look what I think the character should look like. Like, they did a very good job. I mean, he's got that really famous, like, chest sigil, that thing, like the circle, like the three lines coming out of it. I don't know how else to describe it. You can look it up if you need to.
But that's a fair descriptor of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty famous, I think, as far as Firestorm goes as a character.
Yeah, when I was talking about earlier that the early iterations, it's like just fire, and the newer iterations, it's more of like a plasma that's on them. If anyone has seen that TV show, hasn't seen that TV show, they perfectly show that kind of flaming nuclear plasma kind of vibe that it's going for. So I would highly recommend, one, I'd recommend people watching some of the Arrowverse shows, because I think as far as comic book stuff. There's always the joke that DC has like really good television shows, and some of their movies are a little more not quite as well made. I think in this case, their TV shows are pretty darn good in the Arrowverse, so I'd recommend those to everybody. But if you're not interested in going through the whole TV show, at least go and do kind of an image search on what this character looks like, because it is awesome looking. It is high school chemistry master.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like fire-based characters. Obviously, like the Human Torch and Ghost Rider. Like, there's a lot of characters that are on fire. But I think of all of them, I think he's one of my favorites. I mean, he's even just like you were saying, the concept of this character of Firestorm is just so cool.
It's almost like limitless possibilities.
Yeah.
And again, I think I've gone to it once or twice earlier, but just what the writers did creating this character is so cool. Like, this is a character that has infinite possibilities. It could be infinite hosts. They could put him in a bunch of different arcs. I mean, for all we know, at the end of the day, they could end up having the next Firestorm. Whoever's the Firestorm after Jackson could end up being like a villain, essentially. Because, he's the host. I mean, and Martin, as we've seen, does not always choose who he's bonded to. In fact, he never gets to choose. Like, it just kind of happens.
Yeah, I mean, I would really like to see Firestorm in like a full... when DC gets their act together, like a full DC films. As I preferred, just because I liked him a lot as an actor more. I like the Jefferson Jackson version more personally. So I think seeing the Jefferson Jackson and Martin Stein version on like a big screen film adaptation would be really, really cool. Or even if we just see him as like a part of like a combo or Justice League or something like that. Just seeing a really good like cinematic film, multi-million dollar budget CGI.
I would like to see
Firestorm.
a fully self-contained Firestorm movie, kind of akin to like the way they did Shazam, where it's like Shazam has nothing to do with any other movie. It's in its own world. It's just a character about the trials or the movie about the trials and tribulations of this character. I would love to see a movie akin to that, but about Firestorm. Because I think, before you even get to the power of Firestorm, there's a super interesting story about these two individuals and just how they both ended up being at, either the nuclear power plant or like the STARS laboratory, or Star Labs. Sorry, not STARS. STARS is from Resident Evil.
Yeah.
I was like, why is that in my head? That just came out.
Yeah, I think the reason I like the Jefferson Jackson version more is I feel like there's more disparity between Martin Stein and Jefferson Jackson. You have this old professor and this young football star who combine to create such a cool character. So I think seeing that in some kind of like you said, kind of like self-contained Shazam style film would be really, really cool.
Yeah, I think an additional point about what was neat about the iteration between those two is Stein, at least in that show, and he generally is very he thinks a lot and he talks a lot and he doesn't like work a lot with his hands. He creates, the Firestorm Matrix, but like he's not usually the boots on the ground working. But then they made Jefferson like a very skilled mechanic in that. Like, again, going to DC Legends of Tomorrow, the show is what it is, but he essentially like maintains this ship that they're using to travel through space and time. And it's not like, oh, he's this crazy, like, how do you become a space engineer? But like, he knows the inner workings of engines and he, knows how to fix vehicles and things like that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really cool having him like, he's a really smart guy, but he's much more hands-on, which is kind of the essence of Firestorm. You have the hands-on very literally, and then you have more the guidance of the Professor Martin Stein. Very neat.
That makes sense.
Oh, man, dude. Now I want a movie of this. You always do this, Doug. Anytime there hasn't been any movie or a good movie in a while, and we start talking about it, I just start brainstorming about all the possibilities. Like, oh, my gosh.
They could do a good job. I think it could be done really well.
And they've now proved, at least to themselves, well, to the whole world, but they've proved to themselves that, like, DC can make a good, self-contained, just out there story. You know what I mean? Like, because obviously there was that joke going around for a while where it's like, you either need the saga like Batman, but they're just going to make this, they're going to make Justice League and it's going to be terrible or, whatever. But like, I think Shazam is proving for us that DC can make just a dang good one-off superhero movie.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Shazam a lot. I'm also, Ben knows, I'm a big fan of the character Shazam, so I'm very excited to get there eventually. But
That's Warner Brothers, right? Doesn't Warner Brothers make all the DC
yes,
stuff?
Warner Brothers has the rights to DC films. Or
I
characters
like
for
Warner
films.
Brothers.
Yeah, I mean, they do a great
They make
job.
some good stuff. Yeah,
I think they could
that'd be so cool.
I think they could do a better. They could have done a better job with DC. I don't think anyone will argue that with the DCEU they have now. But I think I think a good move for them to do would be, I mean, I think just scrap it. I think just start over. I mean, start throwing out some solo movies and then build to a Justice League and then do it that way. Because I think Gal Gadot, obviously amazing Wonder Woman. I think you got to keep her around, mate. But I think you could pretty much get away with just kind of scrapping.
They could scrap everyone else.
I don't know. I mean, they cast everyone so well besides I love Ben Affleck. I don't think he was a great Batman. I think, obviously, Jason Momoa, as we talked about in our Aquaman episode, was a fantastic Aquaman.
Oh, that's true. I forgot that he was in the, in Justice League and stuff.
Yeah. I think those are the two of my favorite castings for superheroes. Not obviously, the best, but two of my favorites for any superhero movie, Marvel, DC, anything, were Gal Gadot and Jason Momoa.
I feel bad because I thought the guy that played the Flash was fine, but he's just not as good as the television one. And he also didn't have any time. Weird being worse than the television iteration. Maybe that's a ignorant thing for me to say, but I feel like movies should be better than television. But the Flash, I don't know that actor's name because I'm ignorant.
Ezra Miller.
What was it?
Ezra Miller.
No, I remembered Ezra Miller, the television one. But he's fantastic. He's a perfect Flash.
Grant Gustin.
Oh God, yeah, that guy is a perfect Flash. Those television, the person that deserves the award is whoever does the casting for the DC television shows, because those actors, oh my gosh, such a good job.
Melissa Benoist as Supergirl is also a fantastic cast.
Yeah, and then Amell, what's his name? Not Robbie Amell, but
Stephen Amell.
What was it?
Stephen Amell.
Yeah, dude, such a good Arrow. Oh my gosh, handsome guy.
And also one of our
muscular.
favorites. Yeah, one of our favorites, David Ramsey as John Diggle.
Oh yeah! Oh my God, Diggle!
I know he's you and I favorites, so I have to throw it out there.
Diggle's bro. He's the bro. I love that guy. Oh my gosh! Now I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch a bunch of that. That's the other thing that this podcast always does, Doug. I always have these big dreams, and I want these awesome movies, and then I want to go back and rewatch all the stuff.
All right, well, I think that's a good time then to move on to our beer. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good time. So let's get to the old nuclear boom. Let's get to that Boomtown.
Yes. So this beer is called the Crazy Hazy Double IPA, but the important thing we're really talking about is the brewery, Boomtown Brewery. So Boomtown is located on Jackson Street in Los Angeles. So for people who don't know, that's in Chinatown, right near Dodger Stadium. So kind of that area of downtown LA-ish, a little northern part of downtown LA. This beer, the Crazy Hazy, is fantastic. I honestly wasn't sure what to expect. I'd never had anything from Boomtown. I'd never even heard of them until I got this beer. But it is very, very good. It is an 8.2 alcohol by volume, and it's very fruity, which I don't expect unless it says a crazy hazy, unless it says a double IPA with certain kind of hops. I expect a double IPA to be bitter. This was very, very fruity and very citrusy. It was really, really good.
Bouquet.
Exactly. I actually have a can for you. I gotta drop off to you soon.
Oh yeah.
It's very good. I would highly recommend it. If anyone lives in LA or goes to LA, they are still open for pickup in the area. So you can go as long as you're wearing a mask. Go in, pick up beer, and then leave, just like most breweries. And in the brewery section, I will say again, I said last week, support your local breweries. If you are over 21 or 21, please go support your local breweries. Keep them running, keep them going, because they create such great beers like this, like the Crazy Hazy. Support breweries like Boomtown, because I would really recommend them. If I still lived in LA, I probably would have gone to pick this up from them, but now that I don't, I do want to head up there and go try that, though, because this one was so good. I definitely want to try more of their beer. So I would say I got to rate this pretty high. I mean, I'm not going to go I think I go like an 8.5, maybe comicallys for this beer. It was really good.
That's pretty impressive. It's a good beer rating.
My favorite kind of IPAs are like double or triple hazies that are very fruity. So when it hits like
I'd agree
that
with that.
criteria for me, like that's the best kind of beer in my opinion.
It's strong but welcoming.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I love those ones too. Oh gosh, what was that one we had? Didn't we have like a sour IPA pretty early on?
Our first one was a sour Hellboy.
What the hell? Yeah. Well, I thought we had
from-
one that was a sour IPA. I remember the can had like swirlies all over it.
The farmhouse saison.
Yeah, that one was super good, and it was
Yeah,
kind of
I
that
don't-
same descriptor where it was an IPA and it was strong, but it had like
Yeah.
it had like pear or peach or something. Like it had like a fruity thing in there that was delicious.
Yeah, I don't remember the name, but very, very good. So, yeah, all right. So let's see. As far as Firestorm goes, I would say, just from what you've said, I'd say that his character is pretty close to his comic book iteration that we've seen. So I think we can do one comically for this.
Yeah, they iterated upon him very well and very
Yeah.
true to the origin.
I think I'm going to give him an 8. I think I'm going to go an 8.
Dude, I'm going to shock the world here, and I'll give a brief description as to why. I'm going to give it a 7.5 comicallys out of 10, which was
Okay.
weird because I know I spent the whole podcast being like greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of room for this character to grow because of the abilities that he has, and I think we have yet to see the coolest and best Firestorm. So we
That's
will
fair.
re-record this episode when DC in 6 months announces a standalone film with Firestorm. No, it's that character's awesome. I think we've yet to see the greatest iteration. And so I'm going to hold out that 7.5, and it's going to become a 9 once we see that. Once we see the Shazam quality Firestorm, we're going to have that fat 9.0.
All right, that's fair. I can get on board with that.
Alrighty, well, I thought that was a good one. Hope you
Yeah.
thought that was a good one. Awesome. So remember, everybody, this was the Comically Incompetent Podcast. I'm Ben,
And I'm Doug.
and thanks for listening, and stay safe out there, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.